Okay, so for this first item, I'm going to walk you through how to install VS Code, which will be our editor that was actually already mentioned in one of the videos you've watched. And we're going to install Git. Remember, GitHub is the website, but Git is the software we use for version control, which is something you're going to learn. So let's first do VS Code. I'm going to go to this link that I've provided. Now, what will happen here is if you're using a Mac, it'll reflect the Mac download. Again, Chromebooks are doable, but you just need to have more experience of doing that. But I'm just going to download for Windows. And what happens is it automatically starts downloading for me. Oh, intelligence. We'll talk about that. Oh, must have thought I wanted to do it twice. That was crazy. So now that I have it twice, but you only need it once, what I can do, and I suspect many of you have done this before, is you just click on it and it starts to install. So I'm going to say, matter of fact, I'm going to minimize this window just so you can clearly see. And I think pretty much you take the defaults here. I accept the agreement. By the way, you should read it. We should talk about EULAs, which is what that is. This tells me where it's going to put this software, what it's going to be named. There's a couple options I have. I could create a desktop icon. I typically don't. I like to have it in my toolbar. Open code in context, that's up to you. And this add to path is a good idea. So now again, this will look different for Mac as well. So let's just go ahead and do that. Install and let that install happen. Should happen relatively quickly. This progress bar is zooming along. VS Code is the most popular code editor, especially for web development. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish it here. Great. Okay, so now I have VS Code on my local system and it's good to go. So the next step we need to do is install Git. But I actually kind of wanted to take a moment here and just look around and say there's some really good content for learning some of the fundamentals for Git, actually getting Git GIT started with VS Code is a good one to check out as well. I typically do what's called a dark theme. I think by default it's a light theme. You can see how to change these themes. There's a lot here you can play with as far as that goes, but you can also learn some of the fundamentals. And we're going to actually start with talking about the terminal because that's what I want to show you for our next item. Okay. So up at the top here, there's a terminal. I'm going to say new terminal. Now I'm going to go ahead and close the getting started. Now in Windows, the PowerShell is a built-in terminal. So VS Code is using PowerShell, but there are others you could have on here as well. As a matter of fact, what we're about to do with installing Git will provide you another interface or another way to run commands on the command line. So, but before that, I'd read an article recently, and I'm going to type in a command called GIT-version that said, oh, and this is interesting. So what I did is I put in a command in the terminal to see if Git was installed. And in this case, it was not. And this is good to understand because the article I had read said that when you install VS Code, it comes with Git. But I didn't know for sure, and it looks like that's possibly not true. So let's go install it now. Okay, so I'm actually going to go back to the browser, back to Canvas, and go to the second link, which gives me the downloads for in this case, all the different operating systems. Well, not all of them, but 3 of them. So for my needs, I'm going to download it, and it even defaults over here to Windows. Now, if you're on the Mac, let me just give you a little bit of a heads up. I recently had to install a new Mac, and I hadn't had to do it for a while. But by just going to the command line, and in that case on the Mac side, it's terminal. This is not the command I'm looking for. Hold on, let me just see if I can find it real quick. You don't want to clone it. Okay, I tell you what I'll do. For Mac students, I'll find the link and provide it. And it was because the Mac client is a little more involved to install for Git. But if you just go to the command line and actually, I think that's what it was, is on the Mac, if you just like go to terminal and you type what I did before, dash dash version, it'll ask you. It'll say, hey, do you want to install Git? And you can say yes. So you can use the built-in terminal for Mac is there. So ask me questions about that if you run into anything. So let's go ahead and do this for Windows. So for my particular setup, okay, I happen to remember, if you do, that I'm using a 64-bit Windows setup. Okay, and I'm just going to install that one. Now, if you're not sure, I showed before how to look at your operating system. You can just kind of play and start with a 32. It probably isn't going to make that much of a difference. It might tell you, or you could do what I did, which is go to File Manager, then right click on computer to go to properties to figure out what operating system I had. So now while I was doing that, I got the download of the executable for Git. So let's go ahead now. I'm going to actually close for a second VS Code. I'll show you why. So now let's walk through the install of Git. So now it's going to say, yep, changes to your computer. Yep, we do want that. This is its license. This is where it's going to go. Yep, folder anyway. Now for my particular setup, I ended up using git bash, and I'll show you what that means, but it's basically what VS Code when it's running terminal will use as one of its options. By the way, you can still use PowerShell to do this, but in general, I find most people have a little more success by using bash, but also I don't want to say absolutely how you should do it. I'll just make a general recommendation. So on Windows Explorer, I'm going to have the Git bash here. I don't actually like the graphical user interface for Git. I find the sooner that students learn how to use the command line, the better. So for me, I'm going to take that one off. These are associating other file extensions to run. I'm going to leave these the way they are and just hit next. And it'll show up here. I'm going to hit next. Using the default editor. In this case, it's showing Vim, but I'm actually going to go VS Code, not the Insider Edition, which is the latest it's the latest version of VS Code. So I'm just going to use the standard, and it's going to say is the default editor. So VS Code as Git's default editor. I think that's probably a good way to go. Use master. Yeah, we'll let Git decide on which branch. Git from the command line. Use Git from Git only. Actually, I'm recommended this option adds, I haven't seen this option, so I'm going to read it for a second. Minimal wrapper to your path to avoid cluttering. Okay, all right, that's a good thing. Path is the different folders that are used on the local computer to search through when you do commands. So we'll let it do that. Bundle, I don't really need OpenSSH. We don't talk about it in this class. I'll just hit default on the rest of these. Linux is fine for the encoding. That's fine. I'll pick some of these default. There's a lot more. Since the last time I installed Git, there's just a lot more options. Git pull, yeah, that's fine. Again, some of this we will not use. Yeah, so Git credential. Now this will be interesting. This may change some of what I'm going to do next. So this is good. Caching. We're not going to do any of that. And so it took a few clicks to get through some of those default settings. So we can see we're installing 2.3.1 into our local system. Now, I know can be a little, if you've not done installs and something like this might feel a little like, what are we doing? Are we doing harmful things? What I could tell you is that these two pieces of software are very common. Many, many people install them. I wouldn't ask you to install something I would ever be concerned would hurt your system. So at this point, we're just going to go ahead and finish. We're not going to launch Git bash because I'm going to show you how it works with VS Code. So I hit finished here. And how would you like to open this file? Which file are you trying to open? Okay, well, let's just Oh, I see. It's giving me what we call the changes, the latest version and what's out there. Okay, that's good. We'll leave that. All right, so now before we leave this video and continue on with the next piece, I'm going to go ahead and type VS Code here. I'm going to right click, pin it to the taskbar. The other way I can do this is click and drag it. At least I think I can. I used to be able to do that. All right, let's just pin it to the taskbar so I have it, and that way it's always there. I know before I talked about doing it with the snipping tool, but I actually did it this time. So if you don't know how to do it, check that out. Okay, great. Now we're in VS Code. But what I want to show you here in VS Code, because you're going to need this next. Now what happened here is I was in VS Code before, and I'm just going to go ahead and drop out so that arrow was still setting there. I'm going to in VS Code go to terminal. I'm going to say new terminal. And what happens now is that by default it's using, if you can see this, it's using bash. Okay, so bash is the GIT command or terminal interface, or the command interface to do command line, but PowerShell is still there. You could totally still use it if you want. Let's actually see if both of these work with GIT. And here's what I want you to leave this video having installed or having made sure it works. So here type git space -- version. So what we see is we're running version, and we saw this matches the version that was installed, which is great. And just because I'm kind of interested now, what if I do git -- version when using PowerShell, and that gives me the same information. So I think my point is that on Windows only, you could use PowerShell, but typically on Mac, it's Terminal, and Terminal has another thing called ZSH that is kind of its equivalent, but you can also use Bash over there. So at this point, we're ready to move on, but making sure you have these two pieces of software installed is what you want to have done to be ready for the next one.